Have you ever written a prompt and were happy about it, and then later you wanted to use it again, but it was completely gone? Well, that's not a prompt issue, it's a system issue. Hi, my name is Dennis, and I'm software QA engineer, and this is a podcast about productivity in tech. And this is actually my first episode. And in this episode, I want to talk about how to work with AI without creating chaos. How not just to create a prompt, but how to build a reliable AI workflows. When I try to recreate a prompt on the fly, I often miss a small detail or two, and that shifts the entire result. Even tiny changes in wording can completely change the outcome. And the longer the conversation goes, the worse this problem gets. Context starts drifting, noise accumulates. The AI begins mixing unrelated ideas together. At some point, the conversation stops being useful and becomes polluted. As a QA engineer, this reminds me of unstable test environments. Once the environment becomes messy and inconsistent, results stop being trustworthy. AI conversation work the same way. Without structure, without hygiene, outputs become vague, inconsistent, and unreliable. So, instead of relying on a memory or improvisation, you need a repeatable workflow. So, what actually makes a good prompt? A good prompt is not just a text, it is a structured contract where you get to define the context, the role, the task, the constraints, and the format. You basically get to define what's going on, how AI should think, and what needs to be done. And most importantly, you get to define how the result should look. Because if you don't define a format, you don't really control the output. Now let's take a look on how the bad prompt looks. Let's use something simple like summarize this article. Sometimes it might work, sometimes it might not. It's way too general. You might get something way too long, way too generic, or not just useful at all. Now let's make it slightly better. Summarize this article in bullet points. It sounds already better. At least now we control the format. But here's where it becomes really powerful. Summarize this article in 5 bullet points, focusing on key decisions and trade-offs. Avoid generic phrases. Now we added to this prompt a structure, constraints, and focus. And suddenly this result becomes much more consistent. The difference between a bad and a good prompt is not complexity. It is specificity and structure. Now let's take a look at another bad versus good prompt example. Let's use something business related. Create a project plan for my team. But the results will probably be very generic. You'll get vague milestones, generic advice, broad management language. Sometimes that looks professional, for sure. But does it really help? Now let's compare it to this one. AI, you are a generic product manager. Create a project rollout plan for a SaaS product launch. Include milestones, risks, dependencies, stakeholder communication, and success metrics. Return the result as a sections with timelines and action items. Now the AI understands the role, the business context, the type of project, the expected structure, and the level of details. And this is where domain knowledge becomes extremely important. Someone experienced in product or business operations already knows the terminology, the process, the common risks, the metrics they expect to see. So they naturally guide the AI into the right direction. They include keywords, concepts, and constraints that shape the results before AI even started generating. While someone without that context might simply write, make a good plan, or organize this project, which leaves too much room for interpretation. So the better understandings create better prompts. The better prompts create more reliable results. So a good prompt is not about something smart. It is about reducing ambiguity. But good prompts alone are not good enough. Even if you create a really good prompt, another problem appears. Context starts drifting. The longer the conversation goes, the more noise accumulates. The more unrelated information leaks into the discussion, then the less predictable the output becomes. And this is where workflow becomes extremely important. Because AI conversations are very similar to working environments. If the environment becomes messy, results become unreliable. One of the biggest mistakes people make is making too many unrelated tasks into one same chat. You might start with project planning and then suddenly switch to debugging and to brainstorming and to rewriting and asking random questions and performing unrelated experiments. And eventually the AI starts pulling context from completely different parts of the conversation. And that creates fog and confusing output. So, one of the things that can help a lot is to keep conversations atomic. One chat, one goal, one context. Treat chats almost like isolated workspaces or even Git branches. Think about chats like Git branches. Some chats are more exploratory. You experiment there, you brainstorm, you try different things, try looking into different directions. Other chats are more focused and production like. They have clean structure, they have minimal noise, they have clear objectives. And once a conversation becomes messy enough, sometimes the best solution is not fixing the prompt, it is starting fresh. Just dump everything and start with a clean context. One of the things that I do for myself is basically try extract whatever is needed from the context of the messy chat and get that context, place it into the new chat to start from the fresh set. Another thing that becomes important very quickly is naming. Of course, AI create names for the chat branches, and sometimes it comes up with the good ones. But do those names really help you in a while in the future? Sometimes it becomes impossible to navigate. Like in a year, you try to find something that you created and you were happy about the results, but you can't. So you need to imagine future yourself and set the names and try to think what the chat was about, what the problem was solved, and is it going to be reusable? And having that in mind, you need to set specific name that is going to help you in the future. And another thing is also using tags or conversational anchors, because eventually you stop remembering where a thing was, what chat it was lived in. So sometimes I intentionally leave searchable markers inside prompts or conversations. So for example, you can use something like, hey AI, please ignore this keyword in the response. I'm only using it as a retrieval tag for future search. All you need is an anchor or address for future, something like project names, workflow names, stack names, unique identifiers. Not for the AI itself, but for future you. Why this actually matters? Because over time, your AI history becomes a knowledge base. And without anchors, everything blends together. Retrieval becomes painful. Good workflows disappear. But once you start thinking about conversations as searchable assets, you naturally begin organizing them better. So, one of the natural examples you can use are tags or prefixes, or workflow IDs, project names, unique phrases. Even simple things like AI workflow, podcast outline, automation can dramatically improve future retrieval. So, a lot of people focus only on generating outputs, but retrieval is just as important because a brilliant workflow that you can rediscover is basically lost. Now, let's talk about workflow hygiene. Over time, I started treating AI workflows almost like software projects. You refine prompts, you remove noise, you split large tasks into smaller ones, you restart conversations when context becomes polluted. And the interesting part is that when you start doing this, AI stops feeling random. Because now you're not just chatting with AI, you're managing context, you're managing workflow, and you're guiding the system intentionally. And once you start structuring conversations properly, sometimes interesting things begin to happen. Your workflow becomes composable. Instead of one massive conversation doing everything, you begin splitting work into stages. One prompt extracts information, another cleans or restructures it, another transforms it into the final output. And at that point, you're no longer just chatting with AI, you're building pipelines. Not necessarily technical pipelines, but sometimes even simple conversational workflows become pipelines naturally, like research, summarize, refine, transform, publish. So structured workflows create reusable systems, and reusable systems scale much more better than improvisation. So the real power of AI is not just better prompts, it's having structure, having workflow hygiene, keep clean context, and have repeatable processes. Once you start treating the AI like a system instead of the chat, it becomes dramatically more useful and much easier to rely on. So try yourself for your next AI conversation. Treat it like a small project. Give it a clear goal, clean context, structure, and boundaries, and see how much that improves the outcome. With that said, if you find this episode useful and got some new ideas from it, please feel free to leave a comment below. I'd really love to hear from you and your personal results of dealing with AI workflows. Thank you. Bye.